Hey everyone, Kyle here with the Legendary Creature Podcast. So today I want to jump into some gameplay video with you, but instead of jumping in strictly for entertainment purposes, I want to focus in on one card so that we can see the impact of that card in Commander. Now the card I want to focus on this time is Rhystic Study. Now why Rhystic Study? It's pretty straightforward for most of us. We know what we're supposed to do as opponents whenever we see it. But sometimes I kind of wonder if we actually do know what we're supposed to do, or if we stick to it. For those of you who are new to Commander and maybe a little unfamiliar with Rhystic Study, it's an enchantment. You pay 2 and a blue to get it into play, and it says whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that opponent pays 1 generic mana. Now, as an opponent, this should read to me something along the lines of, whenever I cast a spell, I need to pay 1 generic mana, or I'm going to start removing my ribs since I seem to want to fuck myself so badly. Now, to illustrate the point, let's dive into some gameplay video so that I can show you a game that's not particularly interesting in and of itself because one player ran away with the game, thanks in large part to Rhystic Study. All right, so let's set the table a little bit here. In the top left, you've got Tiffany playing Carador. Over from her to the right, you're going to have Andy who's playing Grathama. Down in the bottom right is me playing a Will and Rowan Kenrith build. And over to the left is Kozilek, the Great Distortion, piloted by Brad. All right, so let's dive into this gameplay and kind of watch Rhystic Study play out. I have it in my opening hand, so I'm able to play it on turn 3. Now let's start a count. Let's see how many times we have people not pay the Rhystic Study taxes here. So Brad comes in with the Solemn Simulacrum. He's only got 4 mana available at this point, so he's unable to pay the cost. Then Tiffany comes in with a Farhaven Elf, only able to pay the cost of the card, not my tax. Andy comes in with a Surak. Then we move on. Brad's got a Hedron and a Swiftfoot Boots, but he's only able to pay for 1 of them. So I'm drawing 1 card off of his 2 spells. We go around the table, get back to Brad. He casts the Geode Golem, and he's got 1 extra mana available. It looks like he has 2 because I've neutered his mana rock using Will's activated ability. But he wants to use that extra 1 mana to equip the Swiftfoot Boots to the Geode Golem. He's then able to go into combat, get the trigger off of the Geode Golem, and free cast Kozilek, the Great Distortion. So it's not feeling like it's a bad thing at this point for Brad. Tiffany comes in with her own Solemn Simulacrum and a Spore Frog, neither of which she pays for. Now at this point, I've gotten a lot of card draw off of Rhystic Study already, and it's time for me to start testing the limits of the game. With Kozilek, the Great Distortion already in play, I'm kind of in this position where I know that Brad has a full grip, he has the potential to counter the major things that I have, but I've drawn a lot of cards too. So I have the opportunity to kind of test what the limits are with Kozilek and see what Brad has up his sleeve. Because there's so many creatures out, I just pay 1 red to cast a Blasphemous Act, but its CMC is 9, and I want to see if Brad's got something. So he's got a Nullstone Gargoyle up his sleeve to counter that. And here's where we start to see me get a little bit of payoff from this Rhystic Study. I brought out Brad's 9 CMC spell so that I'm pretty confident at this point he's countered what he can counter at that converted mana cost slot. Starting to count that mana up, and what do I have up my sleeve but an Expropriate that just so happens to be 9 converted mana cost. Brad's absolutely right that he should have countered that Blasphemous Act because he had more on the board that was more important to him than my tokens. In fact, for that matter, everybody had creatures that were more important to them than what I had. However, when you really look at it, I've had enough card draw at this point that I'm able to test the limits of the other decks. With the Expropriate, I take my own extra turn. I get an extra turn from Brad. I'm able to take an equipped Grathama that has Trample and Lifelink. And for Tiff, she's not that drastically affected. I'm able to take a land from her. But notice that I'm also using the Skull Clamp. It's worth noting at this point that I've drawn 9 extra cards off of Rhystic Study, but you see me using the Skull Clamp, and you also see me using Will's middle activated ability to draw cards and cheapen the cost of my spells. So at this point, I've drawn 9 extra cards off of Rhystic Study. I've drawn 6 extra cards off of Will's middle ability, going up and down with him, and I've drawn 4 cards off of the Skull Clamp. I've had plenty of card selection going on my side of the board. I really didn't need the extra help from people giving me cards with Rhystic Study. And truthfully, the Expropriate was kind of a bit of a gamble on my part. It's a very powerful spell, but I didn't actually have a win condition fully in place. I knew that I'd be able to kill one person using Grathama, but I wasn't sure how I was going to button up the game with everything else. However, very recently, I have actually drawn into one of my win conditions, and during one of my extra turns, I'm able to use Will's middle ability, cheapen the cost of my instants and sorceries, draw a couple extra cards, and I'm able to cast Haze of Rage. I've got 4 creatures, and I'm able to storm it 5 times, giving all of my creatures plus 15 plus 0. And having already had 1 combat with Grathama on Brad, I'm now able to send all of these tokens at Andy, cutting his life total down massively even though he was up at 60, and killing Brad. It really is worth noting that I actually didn't draw that Haze of Rage until late in the process of this. However, with all the additional card draw help coming from Rhystic Study, I did get to it. And because of that additional card draw as well as my own, I was able to test the limits of my opponents, make them use any answers that they did have, and then drop my bombs. Now, it is worth noting that the reasons for not paying for a Rhystic Study may vary. In the case of Brad, he actually had a pretty quick game plan that was going on. He was able to get out Kozilek very quickly, and he was able to start countering spells, but it wasn't quite enough. I was able to get out the things that I needed from him so that I could do the things I really, really wanted to do. In the case of Tiffany, she was playing a little bit behind, and also Brad and Andy kind of had a little bit of an alliance where Andy understood that he couldn't deal with Kozilek, and so he kind of needed to team up with him. So Tiffany and I kind of had an agreement with each other. It was politically advantageous to the two of us to work together, but sometimes you need to know the decks you're working against. In the case of Will and Rowan Kenrith, helping me doesn't really help you. For Andy, he found himself in a position where he got a little tempoed and he was behind the pace of everybody else who wasn't paying the costs, even though he was paying most of the costs. So the reasons for not paying that extra 1 mana each time you cast a spell when a Rhystic Study is on the battlefield are variable, but one thing is true all the time. If you don't pay the Rhystic Study cost, you're just fucking yourself.